Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of There's a Will. Today, I'll be talking to Nicholas, no relation, Richardson. We'll be covering a number of exciting and relevant topics for you this week, and I hope you enjoy the show, of course. But first, I know you're dying to welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
See you. We've had you 2 weeks out of 3.
Yeah, not bad.
Which is amazing.
It is. More than you deserve, but there we are.
It was good to have you back, because you were a frequent guest in the early days of the show. A lot, yeah.
Yes.
But then, things happen, and more guests are available. We were talking so much about the war. We were talking about aid agencies, and we've been talking about, with just any kind of person you can imagine, volunteers, soldiers, doctors, and it covered every topic you can think about related to the war. Except we probably need a nuclear physicist or scientist.
Well, let's
since
hope
Oppenheimer's coming out.
Yeah, Oppenheimer is coming out. People are now saying interesting the same thing about artificial intelligence. Are we reaching an Oppenheimer moment in the development of artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
There seem to be 2 schools of thought. One is we've got 5 years before humanity is wiped out.
Yeah.
And the other is don't be so pessimistic.
I don't think that's true, because I remember when I was a kid, they were saying, we'll be wiped out, and we're not.
Yeah, but
they said,
this stuff is getting cleverer and cleverer. That's a problem.
I know, but I saw a recent article. I mean, Elon Musk knows a lot about these things. He's a pretty bright guy. And this is his specialty, is technology, new technology. Obviously, everyone knows that. But worth saying for conversation's sake. And, gosh, it'd be fun to talk to him about this subject, amongst many others. Max Takeman, I think it is, from MIT, is great on this subject too, amongst others. And the fellow from what's it? Now I forgot the name of it. The thing that everybody's using, something AI, for doing research into artificial intelligence and writing things. Actually, you ask it questions and say, plan an itinerary for me going to these different cities in Poland and what I should see, and it'll spit it out within
That was always
a minute,
actually, I remember reading years ago, that was one of the questions which a computer could never answer. Assuming you had to visit every state capital in the United States just once, in order, which is the most efficient way of doing it? Which is the best route? And apparently it was the one question that a computer could never answer.
I wonder if you could do it now.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, you'd have a starting point, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So say the starting point was Washington, D.C. How would you do it?
Exactly. But apparently it's one thing which computers could never give you a definitive answer to.
I'm going to try it. Yeah. Because I'm using this AI just for research and just for fun, really, just seeing what it can do.
Yeah, it all starts for fun, you see.
Yeah, and then it takes over. Listen, I was an early person using computer for writing, and it made all the difference without... that when I was starting to write, there were just these word processors,
right? Yes.
And it made all the difference, because I was such a perfectionist. I could not turn in copy that was not error-free to the newspaper, because you were faxing it in.
Well, I think newspapers and magazines don't have the sub-editors they used to have. Or maybe I've got to the age where I read. I have a subscription to the Times and the Spectator, both of which are
the London
generally
Times.
the Times.
Yeah. The original.
The original Times, both of which are well written generally, but I increasingly notice mistakes in the writing.
Yeah.
Typical one is quicker when they mean more quickly. Presently when they mean at present are just 2 of my bugbears. And this general habit of just lack of accuracy. So I can only assume the sub-editors are not the...
Well, they don't pay sub-editors like they used to.
Well, this is the point.
They're just people who are writing and not editing.
Wasn't it Graham Greene who started life as a sub-editor on the Times? And he said that really helped his writing, because he learned at an early age how to get things right.
Yeah, I remember somebody talking to me about my writing, and I give him a story. It's a friend of mine. I used to, him, and I used to give him a story to read, like an interview or something. I'd say, just read it for something, because I had written it for something I had not gone over the final, but I wanted to see an opinion. Just somebody reading it like a punter, coming to the story. Is it interesting? Even the first page. Does the intro grab you? Do you like it? And what kind of feedback I would get back? Oh, I think you've missed a comma here.
Well, that's important.
And you might need a semicolon. And no, it's not important. Some of the greatest writers didn't give a damn about punctuation, including Celine, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and right down the line. Joyce in his original drafts, if you like that sort of thing. It's not always my
Hemingway's interesting because he's got a very particular style.
It's a beautiful style,
which
yeah.
Nobody else has ever been quite able to imitate.
Well, you have to. It is very specific. It uses as few adjectives as possible. This is the key to Hemingway. You say it in another way. And once you start describing things in another way, you get a beautiful flow and a totally different type of prose flow than you do when you use adjectives and adverbs. He would use adverbs, but sparingly, and hardly ever adjectives, but some. But realizing when you're using it, this is a no-no. Do it another way. Make the person feel. We don't feel in adjectives. We see in adjectives. We don't feel in adjectives. So the whole idea was to make you feel rather than see. And it's true. And the best person, the person he learned this from, was Gertrude Stein. Now, Gertrude Stein broke down the way English language works together. The greatest professor for you to understand writing is Gertrude Stein. Because she invented word experiments that were then capitalized on by people like Joyce and all the stream of consciousness people, and Hemingway, of course, used it in a different way. But she would paint word pictures, and she said the enemy is the adjective. Be declarative. Make somebody feel something. Use words to make people feel, because then you can take them on a ride. And she never said punctuation is the key. Like teachers in school. You know, they're not looking at your substance, they're saying, well, you haven't put a comma in the right
punctuation is
place.
Important.
And
it's
this
all to do with the clarity of the writing.
But to me, this you're doing it as well, but it's not. What's important is the flow of the writing. That's the communication of the writing.
Yes, but you have to be able to do that, you do have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, but
because this is part
if you
of the
read
problem.
Cormac McCarthy.
But this is part of the problem. Children,
oh yeah, you have to.
Children in schools are they're not taught the rules. Oh, what matters are your feelings? But
that's
you can't
true.
express your feelings in either written or spoken English if you don't actually know the rules. And you
that's
don't
not
have
what
a
I'm
rich
saying.
vocabulary. I know you're not, but I'm
this
just
is
saying.
obvious. This is true, and this is a basic. It must be true. It's like, if you're going to write, you have to know how to break the rules. So learn the rules first, then you can break
exactly.
them. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Same with painting. For instance, the Chinese artist that we were talking about, Bo Sao, who's been here and had his big exhibition. He's a classically trained painter. He's perfectly able to paint a beautiful classical picture, but he uses that ability to make beautiful installations. So he has an idea. He's incorporating the idea of installation with beautiful visual recreations that he makes himself. He's not using computers and stuff. So, yeah, there's an artist, or Picasso, for example, who could paint anything.
Exactly.
But he changed the modus operandi.
But he was only able to do that because he knew the rules in the first place and was skilled at doing the job properly.
And that's what your English teacher should tell you.
Exactly.
Be experimental, but learn the rules. They didn't tell me that. At least they would just make sure you put a comma here and a thing here, and that's putting a straitjacket on creativity. You should say to somebody, write for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes without stopping about whatever comes into your head. Whatever subject comes into your head, and just keep writing. And don't stop till I say to put your pencil down. And don't think about punctuation. Then you'll have a natural throw, because you can always go back and edit.
Yes.
Always. And we have plenty of programs for that, but you can do it yourself or have a professional do it. And that's what, so when this friend said to me, your writing needs these commas and things like that. I said, that's what sub-editors are for, because he's not a writer, so he didn't know. I mean, you would turn and copy, and everybody knows they're buying the beauty or the interesting nature of what you write, not your punctuation, because sub-editors, as you rightly pointed out, do that job.
Thank you.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Good.
But that's several thousand articles published, talking about that in a few books, and not finished doing it. But it's worth saying. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this hat, aerial recovery. This was given to me by a very interesting fellow that I met at, I won't say his name because I'm not sure he wants me to broadcast his name, but he's done a lot of undercover work, particularly Mexico, some European countries, Asia, going undercover and rescuing victims of human trafficking. It's called aerial recovery. And his stories were hair-raising. I mean, he's going in, sometimes the people he's rescuing, and I want to have him on the show. If he agrees to have on the show, then we'll know I'll say his name. But I don't want to blow his cover.
I know.
And he told me a lot of things in confidence, so I can't give you details, but I'll say that a lot of times he was going in and rescuing people, children, or adolescents particularly, who didn't actually know that he wasn't a trafficker, because he couldn't. It's absolutely essential that you do not reveal your identity in these situations. You cannot reveal your identity. That can mean death, capture, all kind of torture. It can mean, I'm serious.
No, I believe you.
Because I've done this kind of investigating. I did it in Macedonia, Kosovo, Albania, the fringes of Albania. Albanian mafia was running it, who did horrendous things in the UK, particularly in the last first decade of this century, in London and other cities, major cities in the UK. Just trafficking being one of their things. They capture somebody. As I was in a brothel, I interviewed a lady, had her sitting on my knee, young lady, and just talking to her and buying drinks. She said, "Aren't we going to go upstairs?" I said, "Oh, later. I'm not going to go upstairs." I said, "Oh, we will. But, I'm having so much fun just sitting here talking, and I'm a little tired. We've been busy today, so, there's anything I could say." And they keep walking around, the minders.
I can imagine.
Why is he talking to her for so long, And I wrote a story that was widely published based on talking to her and her story, which was being kidnapped from brought out of Moldavia on the idea that she was going to work in Cyprus as a waitress and bartender, cocktail waitress, and in fact having her passport confiscated and being put into a brothel, of which there were, I don't know if there still are, a lot in Cyprus, and then being brought to Macedonia, to Ohrid, which is on the border. The Lake Ohrid is on the border with Albania, and the Albanian mafia was just operating all around in this area, and into Kosovo, of course. This is your Muslim mafia. And that was one of the stories. At any rate, I was very careful not to tell her I was a reporter. Unfortunately, the person I was with, who went to another place, even more dangerous, didn't get as good a story, but he went to another place because he disclosed to the women in this brothel, where he's completely cut off only by taxi. And of course, you can't trust a taxi because they all run by the mob.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all friends.
Yeah, strange behavior.
Yeah, and he almost got us killed. But I managed to get us out of town. So, and the story I wrote is pretty straight up. It's in one of my books, and it's in my book called "Wish You Were Here," and it'll be in my new collection. It's a long story. It was published in many places in Europe, including Maxim in Germany, and versions of Playboy magazine. All the men's magazines that like those kind of action, hard-hitting stories, and they're good publishers. Published in De Groner Amsterdammer in Holland, for example, which is interesting newspaper. Used to be, anyway, and a number of other places. Couldn't get it published in the States. They didn't believe me.
Interesting.
In the 2000s, up to 2000, and people didn't believe in human trafficking.
How odd?
It was going on, of course. It was going on in the States. They just didn't want to talk about it until it was made acceptable by celebrities. That's our culture. Celebrity says it's okay, then, oh, that's the story, the celebrity, not the story.
Extraordinary and very sad.
It is. But Sebastian Junger had done a story about it, which was what got me on to it. he did a series of very interesting stories in the early 2000s for Vanity Fair. And of course, having seen his book, the movie with George Clooney, where they're fishermen, and they go out and they're swallowed by a huge wave in the end. Nobody ever sees them again. Fantastic movie, by the way. That was Sebastian Junger's first book. And he was very cool. He was very supportive of us doing the story and me publishing it, and helpful. He's a good man. Of course, he's a really good writer. Everyone knows. Now, the reason I bring this up today is because the World for Ukraine conference is happening again. Happened last December before Christmas, where I met these people. And it's going to happen again in September. I'm registered for Aspinade and for this TV show. It's going to be happening in Rzeszów. It's an amazing conference. And they'll be talking about things that have happened over the last year and a half. At any rate, and of course, human trafficking has become even more in the news with this movie, which is the great blockbuster right now, rivaling Mission Impossible. I won't say it did better business, but it's rivaling it. And certainly for an independent movie, it's crazy. With Jim Caviezel from Thin Red Line and from
The Passion of the Christ.
Right, by Mel Gibson. That controversial movie, people love it and people hate it, but it was one of the most viewed movies of all time.
And he had tremendous difficulty getting it made. Had to raise the money himself.
Yeah, and Caviezel's a great actor. I mean, his performance in Thin Red Line is one of the great performances in cinema. Yeah. You know, it's just beautiful, amazing, sensitive and brutal and everything, heartbreaking. Great book, of course, by Miss Jones, based on his experiences in World War II. All right, so the conference will be happening again in September, and come on down if you're available. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to be going for sure, as I said. And hopefully we'll do a show from there. And maybe two. Yeah. In Rzeszów.
I've been to Rzeszów.
In Rzeszów. What?
I've been to Rzeszów.
Nice town.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice town.
Nice
the people who are running this are very nice. Good people. Yeah. It's run by a doctor who owns a couple of hospitals and hotels there. And inspired, of course, this is the center of American operations in Poland, the main center, the main Air Force location and military location. All right, so now let's switch topics.
Okay, your show.
What do you think? I've been talking a lot. I never talk this much.
No, well, you don't get the chance because you've got other people and you.
Yeah, it's the most ever, really, I've ever talked. But I wanted to say this. I think it's an important story. I have a lot of respect for them. And this new movie that's come out, Sound of Freedom, is about human trafficking. And it's apparently an amazing story. And it's a very difficult subject. It was so difficult. Two subjects I found the hardest to do and write about: human trafficking and death row.
Yeah, and there was a film, and I forget the title, a few years ago. I don't even know it was maybe made by the BBC or something like that, a fiction film, but obviously based on fact. And it showed you these young girls, and it was from Moldova particularly.
Yeah.
And these young girls had been very excited. They had these jobs, and then they were taken, and gradually conditions got worse, and they suddenly dawned on them, and they were
it's exactly this girl's
in
story.
These really horrific story. And of course, there's one slightly different, but if you want a slightly, but one of the Liam Neeson ones where his daughter
Taken,
yes, and Taken. I think there was a second Taken as well, which is on the similar subject.
Taken 2,
and then you see this place where they're sort of detaining these girls and injecting them with all sorts of terrible drugs.
It's even worse than that. It's worse.
I can imagine it's worse than that because that's
worse than it looks.
Sort of Hollywood-ified.
Yeah. Because they keep them all living in. They let them go out shopping and everything, but they can't go far. And they have, like in the villages or wherever they are, they always have people around them.
Yeah.
Somebody goes with them and lets them go shopping and says, you have to be back by this time, or big big trouble.
Terrible, really terrible.
Yeah. So the illusion of some small freedom, and then they're right back in there. And then this particular woman young lady I was talking to, was very nice. I mean, she was, you could tell that she was a decently educated person and reasonably knowledgeable. Of course, you would become more knowledgeable about the world being in that circumstance because of survival.
Yeah.
But it breaks your heart. It broke my heart,
terrible.
actually. I had to write it. I felt compelled to pursue. And after my friend got in trouble, I went back undercover to the place and photographed it from the outside with a different driver. And took a real chance.
Yeah.
Going back there.
There's a lot of evil in the world, unfortunately.
Yeah, but you can't bow to it.
No,
I mean,
you mustn't.
and you have to take reason. You have to understand this is evil and it's dangerous, like war. This is dangerous. Don't take chances unreasonably.
No.
Because I mean, for a soldier it's different. But if you're a journalist, photographer, don't take unnecessary chances because your job is to get back with a story.
Exactly.
Your job is to tell that story, not to lose your life or lose your way. Yeah. So, and as a war correspondent, several things, wars, conflicts. I mean, I can say I'm the most experienced, but 5 or 6 conflicts. It's like that. You know, you must be compelled to tell the story. That's why I like doing this program. I feel compelled to get people's stories out there. What's your story? I know you so well.
Not very exciting by your standards, I'm sure.
But I know you so well that it seems silly to even ask.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you wanted to change the subject?
I did. We're running down to the end of the first part of the show. But what I want to talk about coming up is a little lighter subject and more comical, which is the American elections.
Yes.
Since we're just chatting, you and I, my friend.
Yes.
I'd like to hear what your opinion is of that, what's been going on in Britain, and what's going on generally in Europe. And, you know, with the elephant in the room, the elephant on the continent being the Russians, and how to handle it. You know?
Well, it's very difficult how to handle the Russians. It's always been
Nobody's ever been able to have a...
Oh, no. And they don't particularly want to be handled. That's part of the problem. And
they're not very helpful, are they?
No, and we have been, I think, in the West, for want of a better terms, I always say, we've been too naive. On the one hand, immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union, as it then was, there was a great effort made to, I think, bring the Russians on side. They were invited to the G7, briefly became the G8. You know, there was an attempt to make Russia part of it, and yet Russia seemed to, particularly under
Putin didn't want that.
Resist. He has this idea of resurrecting Mother Russia.
Yeah, but also because he's got all the money. If he starts playing the proper games, then he doesn't have all the money and all the power anymore.
Well, yeah, that's.
I mean, anybody's money is his if he wants it. Well, so he's the richest man in the world.
Well, indeed.
Right.
Well, that's part of the problem.
I mean, don't you think that's it?
I suspect so. I mean, there are a lot of people. There were some well-known oligarchs who used to live in London, and people say, "But no, he's really looking after money for Putin." You know,
yeah, but I think you had another point about Mother Russia.
This idea.
I think that's a good point
that Mother Russia is somehow different. It is all about size and geographical expanse, and it doesn't matter about the conditions of the people. They're proud to be Russians. They're proud to be part of Mother Russia. I tell the joke about the man in Switzerland who goes to.
What do you say?
You know, there's a chap who lives in a little hut somewhere in Russia, and he's got nothing. He has to go to the stream every morning to get water, no electricity, and he visits a friend of his in Switzerland, who lives in this lovely flat in Zurich or somewhere. And the Swiss man says, "Look, why do you come and live in Zurich? You'd have a marvellous flat, you'd have hot water, you'd have everything you need, good food, everything is within easy walking distance, this fantastic view of the mountains. You'd have everything. You wouldn't have to struggle every morning, getting up and going to the stream and getting water and worrying about where your next meal's coming from." And the Russian chap said, "But what? Live in such a small country."
I thought you might be going there.
Yeah, that I think is the attitude, and this is the Russian attitude. And I suspect, from a Russian point of view, anything which involves cooperation with other people ultimately is a form of somehow surrender of this perceived freedom.
You know what you remind me of? Now we're running out of time, but it reminds me of Solzhenitsyn And his ideas were that Russia had some sort of messianic mission that was not being fulfilled because of communism, but needed to be fulfilled through Christianity and spiritual leadership. And this was very controversial later for Solzhenitsyn. While he wrote about the Gulag, and everybody said Solzhenitsyn is, outside of Russia, that is, said that Solzhenitsyn is a great visionary.
Because all these dissidents, and I think particularly the most recent case, and there's quite a good film on Netflix, I think, that looked before he was Navalny. There is something about Russia which means they have to return, even though he knew he was going to prison and would probably not survive it. But he felt this need to return to Russia, to make this statement about Russia.
You got a point. We got to end now. Yeah. Navalny had to return to Russia. They always want to go
back to Russia, no matter what's going to happen. They have to be doing it in Russia.
Well, I understand that in some ways, being, but that's for another subject. I just say I understand.
So I've hijacked whatever your change of subject was.
We'll come back. We'll come back after the break, and I promise to change the subject and take off my hat. So, thank you for watching, and see you in a minute. Enjoy these ads. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Will Richardson. There's Will, and in the studio with me is Nicholas, no relation Richardson.
Delighted to be here, as
Still
always.
Working on that. Yeah, it's good to see you.
Good to be here.
I can't tell you. I really enjoy having you here. You've got to come to this World for Ukraine conference.
I will do, thank you.
By the way.
Let me know when it is.
I will. And now, ask me where I was last weekend.
Where were you last weekend?
I can't tell you. It's a secret.
Okay, well, that was a pretty pointless conversation.
No, I can tell you. Just kidding. Just kidding. I was in near Białowieża cycling.
And how was that?
Because I know you have been.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if you are, but you.
But it was very hot weekend. It was very hot last weekend.
Yeah, we've been setting records. They were setting records in Europe.
Yeah.
And it's been really hot for recently, as people know. But it was a lot of fun. It's beautiful in Białowieża. Of course, this is the old forest, where they have the bison.
Yes. Everybody
knows that, the European bison, and the oldest so-called primeval forest. That is uncultivated forest for forever.
Yes. So and when we talk of bison, interestingly...
And Europe.
There are some bison, I think they may have even been Polish bison, which were put into a new reserve in Kent, in England.
I believe that, yeah.
And one of the bison has just given birth. So the bison population in England has increased. From 3 to 5, I think, they now have 5 bison.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the effect it's having on the forest area where they've been released. It's very positive.
Okay, how does it affect it?
Because the weight of the bison means that they actually trample the ground and break it up. And just their effect on vegetation is very positive.
I did not know that, but there's a reason they exist.
Yeah, well, nature is generally imbalanced. The same, they've been introducing some beavers into other parts of it, which they think will help with flooding. Because the beavers, of course, build dams and things, which is actually a natural way of preventing other land from flooding.
Yeah.
It's all part of this general rewilding. I think somebody, there has been some discussion about reintroducing some wolves into Scotland, although folks seem a little more wary about wolves for obvious reasons.
Wolves, I don't think there's a threat from wolves to any people in modern times, if there ever was, really.
No, a threat if you've got sheep.
Sheep, yeah. Even dogs can deal with wolves. I mean, the wolves generally they won't get into a conflict like that unless you come on their territory and come after their, kids or something.
Yeah, exactly, like most animals.
Yeah, I mean, but at any rate, I'm no wolf expert, but there's plenty of I've read about it and watched the shows, National Geographic.
So that's quite interesting, generally as well.
Yeah, but it's fascinating. And so anyway, in Białowieża you can go and see. There's a park. They've created a new park which is fenced off, where you can go for 20 zlotys, I think it was, 25, something like that. You can walk around this enclosure, or several collection of enclosures, and in the first one they have local kind of ponies, which are very sweet, really. They're not Shetland ponies; they're bigger than that. They've got longer legs, but they're not full horses.
Yeah.
Or the small horses. That's what a pony is, really. So And then you go on, the next one is, there's a lys,
Fox.
no, not a lys, there are foxes running around in the forest. I saw a couple of those on the bikes. No, a lynx.
Lynx, okay.
Is what I meant. Lynx or rish, in
Right.
Polish, right? A lynx.
Lynx.
And there was a nice fat lynx, sleeping in the sun. It's a beautiful animal, as anyone knows. And there are a lot of them in these forested areas of Poland. They say there are even some in Campinos, but I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if the area is big enough, really, for a lynx to feel
At home.
At home, yeah. But it's big enough for the elk to feel at home. So who knows? And then you go along, and then there's some elk. There's various kinds of deer. They name all the deer, and we call them all deer in England or America, but here they have several different names for the deer, depending on their size and this sort of thing. And so they have the, and I think some are a little different variety too. But I'm no expert on this. And it's quite fun to walk around. But then you can go out into the forest on your bicycle, and there are various points, overlook points, where they have towers. And you walk up this tower, and you can see out over, the fields. And some of these places you can see wolves. They have wolves. Or you can see the bison. If it's not too hot, they'll be out. So really better time September, May, April, beginning of October, to see them than in the summer, because they're trying to hide, like most of the animals. So it's a really interesting place. Beautiful. Podlasia is beautiful. I'm a big fan of eastern Poland. Lubelska, Podlasia, Bieszczady. I think this is some of the most extraordinary countryside in Europe, and forests, I would say. Mm-hmm. Small rivers. You have the Bug River coming from, it forms part of the border, then comes up towards Warsaw. The Narew coming, both of them from Belarus. No, Bug comes from Ukraine, and then the Narew from Belarus, and they eventually join outside Warsaw. And some of the most beautiful marshlands along these two rivers. One of which forms the border, the Bug, with Belarus and Ukraine for a bit. And of course, this is where people were walking across. So now there's a big wall.
Yeah, exactly.
A fence wall, a wall fence, to stop people walking, because you could. I was there 2 years ago, and I said to myself, you could just walk across here. There's nothing to stop anyone.
Not anymore.
And boy, they started doing it 2 months later.
Yeah.
This Russian provocation, I suppose it was, wasn't it?
It was.
Shipping people in. Yeah. At any rate, that's what I did over the weekend. So I wanted to ask you, we're in this time, the United States, Britain used to be there, the United States has been there since World War II, and we're hoping that it's going to continue to be the leader in what's right and how to do things properly, and better government, better versions of government in the world, along with Europe, right? Who also follows the American, let's face it, model, Polish-American model. The Poles were doing, the French did a pretty bloody job of it. Poles were better, more civilized, and so the Americans, a little contretemps with the British 250 years ago. Now, as we look at the war and what to do with Russia, a lot of decisions have to be made, but we need a leader.
We do.
In the United States.
Yes.
And that's our problem.
It is.
We don't have, or we haven't found, a proper leader. And it's a cliche to even talk about the divisions. They're so obvious to everyone. Everyone knows it. how do we find this leader? And what's your view from the outside?
Yeah, it's very worrying. And it always amazes me at most recent United States presidential elections that for such a large country with such a long democratic history, and you could make a similar argument to the United Kingdom, of course, but we don't have a presidential system, you always end up on the eve of the election with the two candidates really nobody wants. And if we end up with Biden and Trump next time, it's just a disaster. I mean, Biden is not the right person to be president any longer. I mean, there are questions over his mental and physical capacity to actually do the job. And Trump is not a man you would trust to do the job he showed last time. So it's really the parties have to get themselves organised and choose some candidates who are electable.
It'd be good to see a proper centre liberal, classic liberal, and a proper conservative,
well, it would.
as it used to be. It'd be nice to see examples of both.
And Trump is particularly, I think,
it would help the dialogue.
To be criticised for, which is a point Chris Christie made, for on the eve of on the night of the last presidential election, claimed the election had been stolen on the basis of no evidence whatsoever. And for Americans particularly to criticise a system on the basis of no evidence as if it was some sort of third world country is very sinister. And I think what is really part of the problem, a lesser problem in the United Kingdom, is people thinking all of a sudden that the ends justify the means and they can criticise the system, whether you're criticising the UK, the civil servants, or you're claiming that the electoral system has somehow failed the people of America and elected them. It's just irresponsible at its very least, and more than irresponsible at its worst. And so I hope that both American parties can sort of wake up and stop this divisive nonsense, and each of them choose a candidate who is worthy of the job.
What do you think about that? Absolutely, well said. I couldn't agree more. I think, there's this, not to quote Richard Nixon, I will quote Richard Nixon.
Well, Richard Nixon,
there's a silent majority who I think are would roar their approval.
Well, the silent majority.
Silently.
The silent majority
I'm
sure the silent majority is increasingly frustrated by politicians who appear to completely disregard the views or the values even of the people who elect them. And we see this also writ large in the European Union. Nobody has asked any country in the European Union whether they want their countries to be thrown open to large numbers of people from an alien culture. And yet they are told, oh, well, we have to take these people. We're told we need these people for work. Well, that's a Ponzi scheme, because these people come for work and they grow old, they bring their families, and they become the burden we're trying to escape from. Or, there has to be a safe route. Why? Nobody's told me what the numbers are. What are the numbers? 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, 1 billion? Because there are vast numbers, increasing numbers of people in the world who, given the chance, would understandably leave their country of origin. And we cannot accommodate them all.
This
in
is
the
true.
UK now, we have this redundancy, though you've got to have immigrants. Yet we have even Ukrainians who we took in, not as many as Poland did, but took it, are now finding it difficult because there's such a shortage of housing in the UK for the people who are already there, that some people now are leaving the UK back to Ukraine because there is no accommodation for them.
It's a ridiculously crowded island.
It's ridiculous.
And when I lived there,
last year the British government gave visas. We talk about illegal immigrants. Last year the British government gave visas for 1.2 million people. 1.2 million people. So we had net migration of 600,000. That's almost 1% of the population in 1 year. And we're already struggling with housing and these sorts of things. And it's absolutely completely
1 million is just crazy.
The politicians are not, but if I say, oh, you're a racist, you've got to have people. Oh, we've got
nothing to do with racism.
No, it's common sense.
It's common sense.
And it gets back to my point that people feel increasingly betrayed by their leaders who live in these bubbles.
You can't go live in any of those countries.
No, I can't.
Without their
proper
permission.
Paperwork.
You can't just go and live in Nicaragua.
No, I can't.
I lived in Nicaragua, but you had to leave every 3 months, cross the border, go out, come back, get stamps. You had to, and if you were going to stay longer, you had to apply for a visa. You couldn't just go there and stay without proper papers.
But this is a major problem, which problem cannot be solved by lawyers using laws which were designed after the Second World War to deal with displacements of people in Europe, essentially, in the modern world of mass transit, mass communication, and, put it bluntly, mass numbers of people. Something has to be done, but the politicians are just not actually getting together and sorting it. And those who try, like the Italian Prime Minister and others, are branded by particularly and the Poles, of course, as somehow racist.
She's called a new Mussolini. A Mussolina.
But she's merely trying to deal with a problem, because you do the people of the country, including recent immigrants, no good at all, and you let them down if you lose control of the system.
Of course. And the recent immigrant, for example, in California, there's now apparently, I mean, I hope it's not apocryphal what I'm saying, I hope it's true, that what I heard is correct, anyway, whether it's... and that is that the people, the Hispanic, for example, mostly from Central America, Mexico, who've been living in California and came there properly, you know, with proper papers and everything, and paying tax and all those things, that those people are very resentful of the border being open and not people just walking in and being able to stay. Of course there are. And there's a backlash against those in California. There's also a lot of Californians leaving California. There's a real drain there because of their policies about crime, homelessness.
Yes.
And when they create industries out of, you know, rehabilitation of criminals, rehabilitation of homeless. You know, instead of actually solving the problem, eliminating it, they're creating an industry that employs a lot of people and get paid, and a lot of times, quite good whacks for being in that business.
Well, this is the problem. You know,
so they're basically leeching off the unfortunate other people.
It's a slightly different form of the whole problem of trafficking. It's, you know, people moving from one part of the world to the other where they may or where they ought not to be in many cases. And so we need leaders who are prepared to address these issues logically and sensibly. But
you don't mean trafficking. What you mean is illegal immigration.
Yeah, well,
that's
you know,
trafficking's a little different.
Certainly in the yes, but it's certainly in the channel.
Trafficking is often done legally, in the fact that they have passports and they come in.
Okay.
But then once they're in,
we're talking about gangsters making money off moving people from one boat to the other.
They just produce a false passport later. For the people.
So this is a big problem, and we need leaders. And in America, I don't see either Trump or Biden being the solution to the problem. They're certainly not people who inspire leadership. And for good or ill, America is the leader of the Western world.
Look how embarrassing these leaders are. Well, first of all, I'm going to say one thing. No, I'm going to say this. Let's talk about how embarrassing these people are. Then I'll make a point about people wanting to go to Europe, longing to go to Europe, longing to go to the United States, and people in Europe and the United States criticizing the hell out of themselves.
Yes.
Ridiculously so.
Well, this is nonsense.
And hating their history.
That's terrible.
You know, you've got to own. If you talk about identity politics, the first thing you got to do is own your own history.
Well, exactly. And this is why
it's ridiculous.
And this is why this whole nonsense about slavery is ridiculous, because it seems to me that the only people who can be guilty of slavery are white Europeans, forgetting the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, and everybody else.
You have to erase
What
history.
about asking for compensation from the governments of Ghana and Benin, who were the people who actually sold the slaves in the first place? That's always forgotten, because it's beat the white man until I need something from him. I hate you, you're a white man, I hate your colonialism. Oh, but by the way, I need to come to your country illegally and you have to give me a house and a job.
Well, I think
that has to stop. We have to have politicians who stand up and say, this is nonsense.
I don't think that this is a prevalent attitude. I think it's a prevalent attitude amongst white people rather than people who are not white. It seems silly.
But I tell you the story.
At this stage, it seems silly talking
this was a letter
about
the
colours.
But, you know, outside Oriel College, Oxford, Cecil Rhodes left a lot of money to the college, and on the high street facade of Oriel College, Oxford, there's a statue of Cecil Rhodes, which, of course, everybody wanted to take down because of slavery, blah, 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 blah. But there was a letter in the Times from a woman who is French. She is from Tunisia or Algeria. And she said, for me, and she actually is at the same, she lectures at Oxford College, and she said, for me it is marvellous to walk down the high street in Oxford, and on the one side I can see a statue of Cecil Rhodes, I can see other statues, on the other side I can see the University Church, and I can be part of this great culture. And she said, I'm so grateful that my mother put me in Tunisia, I think it was, into the French school system, because by being in the French school system I could learn French, I could go to university, I could get a job as a teacher, which I would not have had otherwise. And she said, my grandmother back in Tunisia is so proud that her granddaughter from an Arab country is in Oxford teaching French to the French.
No, of course.
And
it's
this is the
fantastic.
point. So we can be proud of our history. And these people who say, oh, we want to take it down.
Ambition and assimilation, which are the enemies of Marxists, because the idea is to the Maoist idea has taken precedent of just eliminating history and making everyone equal by not letting anyone stick their head up.
It was forgotten that the British were the first European nation to outlaw the slave trade.
I didn't say that very well.
But that's forgotten because, oh no, there's sort of some original sin which attaches to white people, which they now want to teach in schools. Absolute and complete, utter rubbish.
I think this
it will be nice to hear.
I think it's a minority idea that is put across by race baiters. It is not an idea abroad in the population.
Well, no, it's not.
Regardless
but the population
of ethnicity.
are represented by people of this ilk, and that is part of the problem. They didn't vote for people of this ilk. This is not policies they voted for, but this is what they're given.
It's to stir people up to get attention and power.
Yes, but unfortunately,
most of this, because the laws are in place.
Yes, but
anti-discriminatory laws are in place, and I don't see these examples of discrimination against ethnic minorities.
No, nor do I.
I don't see it here.
And then
I don't see it in the United States. I didn't see it in Britain.
There was a government survey in the United Kingdom a few years ago, and it was a chap of, I think, his parents who was of West African extraction. He concluded, after lots of research with a very eminent panel of people who helped him compile this report, that there was no institutional racism in the United Kingdom. And guess what?
I never saw it.
Guess what? He was pilloried by everybody because this is not a view which the left wanted to hear.
Well, I'd like to say to those people, when I lived in London, I lived in Hampstead.
Yeah.
I lived in South Kensington, near Chelsea, for people who don't know. And I lived in Brixton. And perfectly accepted in Brixton, never any problems.
Well, no.
I went out during the Brixton riot. I'm a young reporter, I said, I better go see what this is. And it was in the 90s. And I went out in the Brixton riot, and my God, the stuff that was going on.
You see, you look at
nobody bothered me.
You look at the British cabinet, the current cabinet. How many of them are from people of ultimately ethnic extraction? And they've made it to be the British cabinet. But the left say, oh, they're the wrong sort of Indian. They're the wrong sort of immigrant.
Well, this is
because they're not playing the victim card. These are people who went to school, went to university, got on with life.
Well, this is the worst part of the Labour Party. They're always carping, and they're always trying to tell everybody you have to.
I've heard it from our contemporaries
You have to think this
way. People you and I know in Warsaw have exactly the same view. And they said something. And I said, but look at every European country, look at the United Kingdom, and look at the government of every European country. Look at the government of the United Kingdom. How many people from ethnic minorities are in the government of the United Kingdom? Oh, well, they're the wrong sort of people.
What about,
you're the wrong sort of Nigerian, you're the wrong sort of Ghanaian, you're the wrong sort of Indian, you're the wrong sort of Pakistani. What a patronising and nonsensical attitude
Have you noticed Poland, for example, has been criticized a lot on this subject?
Yeah.
They were criticized for not taking immigrants. This is hilarious. Please bear with me. Wait, let me finish. And then jump in, because we're going to run out of time. And I think it's worth saying. Poland was criticized, oh, they're not accepting immigrants, whatever. The Germans, of course, accepted immigrants because they're going to be labor for them, for their factories, right? And working in small businesses and corporate, low-level businesses, low-level and big businesses. And Poland was criticized. Then what happened? Of course, everybody forgets. Once you're in the EU and you have your working papers, you can go to Poland. Nothing's stopping you. Yeah. And then when the war happened, Poland had 8 million people come through, more or less.
For which the European Union gives it no credit whatsoever.
Yeah, and people haven't said
for the European Union, these people who came from Ukraine are hard-working.
Yeah.
They are European.
Yeah.
They're predominantly Christian.
Yeah.
Therefore, they're the wrong sort of migrants for the European Union to grandstand about.
And that's sick.
And that is sick because the von der Leyens and other people of her ilk, how many of her neighbours are like, oh no, because I live in this bubble, I've got this inflation-linked pension, I'll never have to work again in my life when I retire, when I'm thrown out for incompetence, I don't have to worry. But yes, your child should go to a school where you're surrounded by people who don't want to learn it. It makes you want to...
Yeah, I don't want to get off on that tangent. I mean,
this is part of the problem where we talk about leadership and the need for good leadership, how we're not being well served.
My point was this. If you look at Poland, since this wave of immigrations, Poland's got lots of immigrants from all over.
Poland issued more visas to non-EU citizens than any other country in the European Union.
Yeah.
But Poland is still pilloried as being this racist,
because they
horrible
don't
country.
like a country that is standing up for itself and saying, we got to erase from the map, we're not letting it happen again.
Exactly.
And I respect that. I mean, I love that, actually. But it goes right back to the principles of the 18th century, the principles of liberty. And I have to say, and they were right about Putin in this country as well.
They were.
Because they know the Russians. Nobody knows the Russians like the Poles and the Ukrainians together, and the Belarusians, let's say. They know the Russians. And that border's been back and forth, and they've fought so many times that we're trying to stabilize it. And that's what NATO and that's what the European Union is supposed to be about, stopping the Russians dipping their
But of course,
beak.
Then you have the French and the Germans who are always very sort of, well, under Angela Merkel,
They're only interested in themselves.
This great sort of wise European leader
No, they're interested
who actually
in themselves.
made Germany so dependent on Russia, it's almost pitiful.
Yeah.
And the French just are like the Russians. The French are what the Russians would have been if they'd been successful. They just like to stir it wherever.
Well, I love all the European countries,
well,
actually.
So do I.
love Europe.
But my point is,
I speak French, I love France.
We've reached a very critical stage
like
in history, I think, where things we have taken for granted, we can no longer take for granted because leaders who we assume would actually share their love of our country and will protect us no longer do that.
And we've come back to that.
In the narrow English context, it's what Lord Hennessy, the great constitutional historian, described as the good chap theory of government. The United Kingdom does not have a constitution written down on one piece of paper. But there are lots of bits of paper and there are lots of constitutional practices because it assumes, and it worked right up until Mrs. Thatcher's time, that the people who actually got to the top in politics would be sufficiently knowledgeable and would have sufficient integrity to know how to behave. And that has broken down since, and the worst example is Boris Johnson, a man who, ironically, had a good education at Eton College, had the best, went to Oxford, had obviously
great writer.
Chap, amusing
writer.
Yeah, exactly. Yet completely and utterly failed when it came to the question of integrity and actually being able to do the job. He
unable to control his appetites.
Yeah.
We're going to have to go. But
we could talk about this for a long time.
You and I will continue, no doubt.
We will.
And I want to thank you for being on the show.
Always a pleasure.
Nicholas, it's always good to have you here, my friend Nicholas Richardson. I want to thank you, my friends, if I can say that, and colleagues and comrades, for watching the show. We'll see you next week on There's a Will.